Okay, good afternoon. I'm Ekaterina. This is a joint work with Krasimira Aleksova, who is attending another conference right now. It's just a coincidence, so she's not with us today. So I'm presenting corpus-based study on the evidential strategies and grammatical marking in clauses governed by Verba Dicendi in Bulgarian. We aim to explore the interaction of the grammatical person in the main and the dependent clause when converting direct into indirect speech after verb of utterance and the evidential used in the dependent clause. So we analyze sentences with the following structure. We have a verb of utterance in the main clause. We choose the verb, the aspect pair казвам, кажа, which is saying imperfect and imperfective and perfective respectively, as the most frequent and the most neutral verb of utterance in Bulgarian. And the dependent clause is the content clause serving as a direct object of the verb of utterance introduced by the complementizer che, that. So the clauses are of the type they said that she was ill, for instance. Now, Bulgarian has a grammaticalized evidentiality, but in sentences with a strong lexical marker, such the verb to say is, the use for a non-first-hand evidential is not obligatory. This is a case of the so-called context-induced variability. We analyze two possible strategies in the dependent clause, the first hand and the non-first hand respectively, and how they are motivated by the grammatical person, which on the other hand is relating to the knowledge of the speaker about the situation. We use two methods, quantitative analysis and a qualitative one, both obtained by the Bulgarian National Corpus. A brief reminder of the evidentiality system in Bulgarian. It's a system classified by Eichenwald as A1 type, that is first hand versus non-first hand. But in fact, the non-first hand comprises three morphologically marked forms: the reportative, which is marked by the omission of the auxiliary in the third person, the inferential with the presence of the auxiliary, and the dubitative with the specialized auxiliary build in all persons. The non-first-hand evidentials arose from the perfect tense, but further developed their temporal paradigms. And the emergence of the imperfect active participle is associated with the development of the evidentiality system in Bulgarian, and it cannot form the perfect. There are some cases of grammatical homonymy that need to be mentioned in the Bulgarian evidentiality system. The first and the most important one is the homonymy between the indicative perfect tense and the inferential aorist. So the forms of the type cele are difficult to be disambiguated. Even in the context, there are usually multiple readings. And concerning our case study, there is an ongoing debate in the Bulgarian linguistics which form is used in the dependent clauses governed by Verba Dicendi. The other type of homonymy is the inferential and the reportative in the first and the second person, as a grammatical marking by the auxiliary applies for the third person only. The reportative and the dubitative can coincide in some cases. We can assume that either the reportative can express doubt or the auxiliary of the dubitative can be omitted. And finally, the reportative perfect and the proof perfect, this is the same form, and the dubitative aorist of the type Chelbill also can be a case of homonymy. So I will start with statistical data. We used the Bulgarian National Corpus to obtain the number of occurrences of the first hand and the non-first hand after verbs of utterance. We used a regular expression for the following pattern to obtain the data. First, we search for verb of utterance, казвам, кажа, in the respective persons, in all tenses. Then we have the complementizer, che. Then we put a distance of 0 to 2 words for clitics and so on. And then for the first hand, we search for the tenses of the indicative as they express the first hand. And for the non-first hand, we search for the L participle, the past active participle. As the disambiguation of the perfect indicative and the aorist inferential is impossible, the perfect has been sorted as an indirect evidential. We don't have means to disambiguate formally. And not only, as we'll see. So these are the results. You can see in the first column, the person in the main clause. In the second, the person in the subordinate clause. Then the evidentials first hand or not first hand for the respective combination of persons. And then the number of occurrences and the percentage between the first hand and the non-first hand, like respectively. So first of all, we can see that when we have the third person, we have the most occurrences in the third person of the main clause, and then the combination third in the main and third in the subordinate is the biggest number. Other thing we can comment is the ratio between the first hand and the non-first hand. We can see that the first hand is clearly most used, most frequent. We'll comment that in the discussion that follows. And we can see stable ratio like 90 to 10% between the first hand and the non-first hand. And we can see that the non-first hand increases when we have the third person in the main clause, and the second or third in the subordinate. So this is related to the weakest knowledge of the speaker. Now we will explore the two strategies in the dependent clause, like first hand or non-first hand. The first thing we can say that they're dependent on the tense or the temporal orientation, and they differ in terms of whether the non-past or the past is used in the dependent clause. So when we have the first hand in the dependent clause or in the converted speech and non-past temporal orientation, in those cases the verb of utterance in the main clause seems to be sufficient to convey a non-witness position. And the indicative tenses do not necessarily imply first-hand information. So they can indicate both first-hand and non-first-hand because we have the lexical marker for non-first-hand. And on the opposite, in the past, the use of the indicative is restricted, and we can hypothesize that it emphasizes the witness position when used at all. With the second strategy, the non-first-hand in the dependent clause is just the opposite, as I said. For the non-past, the use of the non-first-hand evidential is optional. They emphasize indirect information, and for the past, the use of the non-first-hand is regular with the respective values of every evidential except the inferential, which rarely expresses inferred information, but rather is a neutral or non-emphatic means to denote non-witness position. So in what follows, I'll make a context analysis of some sentences extracted from the Bulgarian national corpus. They have been sorted according to the person in the main clause, but I'll mention the person in the dependent clause too. So with the first person in the main clause and the first strategy, that is first hand in the dependent, as the first person refers to the actual speaker, the information in the utterance is presented usually as strong knowledge. So the use of the first hand is regular in the dependent clause, even if it has a past reference and it emphasizes the witness position. Like two examples, you can see казахте, че не разбираш, or казахте, че беше така. We have the past orientation here, but again, the speaker uses the first hand, the imperfect tense in that case. For the non-first hand, in many sentences, we could make a perfect reading. So this is the perfect tense, and it is usually motivated by some typical adverbials such as always, never, etc. Нали ти казах, че никога не съм изпитвала такива чувства. Didn't tell you that I had never felt like that. Another option is if the speaker focuses on their non-witness position, and in this case we had many negative forms. So in the example, не казвам, че си искал да убиваш, I'm not saying that you intended to kill. It's like I'm not saying because I don't know, that it implies a weak knowledge. And then an interesting case with the first person. The non-first hand is used if the speaker conveys false information. So if the speaker lies and makes it intentionally, like both speaker and listener are know that the speaker lies. So you can look at the sentence, at the example. Казах им, че една ръждясала решетка се изтрошила, and blah blah blah. So finally they accepted my word of honor and left. So he lied, and both speaker and listener are aware of that. So I continue with the second person in the main clause and the first hand strategy. It emphasizes the witness position, especially if we have the first person in the dependent clause. Again, this is normal. The witness position is possible also with the second and the third person in the dependent clause. And in the sentences that you see as examples, the speaker presents his or herself as a witness to underline a strong knowledge. Say that you lied and you'll be forgiven. So the speaker is rather sure that they lied. And then the verb of utterance in the main clause would be the only marker for non-first hand, and then the first hand is used as a neutral form. The non-first hand strategy, again, we have many sentences where we cannot disambiguate between perfect and inferential. So many of them have rather a perfect reading, as how many you said you had created up to now. Thank you, Priya. Or the speaker takes a non-witness position and calls the listener's words. And with the first person in the dependent clause, a non-witness position means that the speaker does not remember the situation described in it. If you are saying that I spent about 3,000 years here, that may be so. So I don't remember. Now, with the third person in the dependent clause, the inferential and the reportative differ by the present and the omission of the auxiliary, so we can make the difference. To express the present with a non-witness position, only the reportative is possible because the inferential cannot have a present value. This is one of the peculiarities of the Bulgarian evidential system, and the dubitative interpretation is also possible. An interesting case are the second persons in the main clause in the imperative for future. And this, with the non-first-hand strategy, we found many examples, again, in which the speaker wants the listener, the interlocutor, to make a false statement, so to lie again. You will say you were drunk, which is not true. And I go on with the third person. So with the third person in the main and the first person in the dependent, the first hand is the predominant strategy expressing strong knowledge of the speaker, while the use of the non-first hand is associated with the emphasis of the reported speech, like the speaker quotes the words. While with the second or third person first hand in the dependent, we have the biggest increase of the non-first hand in the dependent because this is the weakest knowledge of the speaker about the situation. Now, in the non-pulse, it is still possible to express non-witness position by the first hand, that is only the lexical item remains the only evidential marker. But for the past, the non-first hand is preferred. The non-first hand is the prevailing strategy for the past, as I already mentioned. However, there are sentences again with a possible perfect reading, but most often the non-first hand denotes non-witness position when the information is reported. When the dependent, with the third person in the dependent clause, the differentiation of the reportative and the inferential is possible. That's why we checked the ratio. So you can see the table that the inferential is the preferred strategy, in fact, although we have specialized reportative forms. On the other hand, we are not sure that this is the inferential, so it could be the perfect tense of the indicative or the inferential aorist. We will not resolve this problem here, but there are two opinions about the grammatical form in the dependent clause after group of utterance. The strongest argument for the aorist inferential is that if we assume that the original utterance is a past indicative tense, aorist or imperfect, then the converted indirect speech, which is converted into the respective tense of the evidentials, of the non-first hand evidentials. But on the other hand, the context usually implies reportative semantics. And still we use inferential. The arguments for the perfect indicative, it is said that the perfect has the taxis use after several types of verbs, Verba, Dicendi, Sentiendi, and Comitandi. So the perfect has been generalized as a universal tense to express an event which is prior to the event in the main clause. And a third possible interpretation is that it's a contamination of the perfect indicative and the aorist inferential in contexts that support both past and non-first and information. So to conclude, Bulgarian is a language with grammaticalized evidentiality, but displays complicated strategies In communicative acts with converted speech after verbs of utterance involving both first-hand and non-first-hand evidentials. Some problems are difficult to resolve, as we saw, due to the grammatical homonymy. However, some conclusions about the evidential strategies in the described context can be made. Now, the main viewpoint for the choice of evidential strategy is obviously the knowledge of the speaker about the information they communicate. The first person in the main or in the dependent clause is connected to the predominance of the first-hand strategy. The non-first-hand evidentials combined with the first person are associated with an unusual situation. The speaker quotes information which is acquired directly. This is supposed to be done if the speaker intentionally makes a false statement. The same conclusion holds for the second person imperative of future of the verb say in the main clause, followed by a non-first-hand in the dependent, with which the speaker expresses their wish, the false statement to be made by the addressee. The weakest knowledge of the speaker is encoded in the third person and results in the increase of the non-first-hand in the dependent clause. The grammatical marking of the non-first-hand evidentials in the third person allows for the differentiation of the inferential and the reportative, but the homonymy between the aorist inferential and the perfect indicative remains difficult to resolve. The dubitative is marked in all persons, and even in case of homonymy with the reportative, the disambiguation is in context. And despite the grammaticalization of the evidentiality, the verb say remains a strong evidential marker, and in some contexts it is sufficient to indicate the non-first-hand. That is, the non-first-hand grammatical form is redundant in those cases. Some references used here, and thank you for your attention.